Picture this. A woman mid-50s, wild blonde hair escaping a presumed ton of hairspray, huge sunglasses hiding her eyes even on an overcast day, and a leopard print top stretched a little too tight. She's dragging a full trash can down her driveway, a smirk playing on her lips. Then, with a grunt and a truly malicious grin, she appends the entire thing: rotting vegetables, slimy takeout containers, sticky wrappers, all over her neighbor's otherwise immaculate lawn. My lawn. That was my new neighbor, Karen, and yes, that actually happened. Have you ever been pushed so far by someone's sheer, unadulterated entitlement that you almost didn't recognize the person you were becoming in response? That was the moment for me, watching that garbage fly. Karen thought she was making a statement, teaching me some kind of twisted lesson because my oak tree dared to shed its leaves onto her precious driveway. But what she didn't realize, in her garbage-throwing glee, was that this single act of petty warfare wasn't just going to be a temporary eyesore. Oh no! Her disgusting little tantrum was about to unearth a whole heap of her own secrets, and the fallout would be far more costly and humiliating than she could ever imagine. She aimed to ruin my peace. She ended up demolishing her own carefully constructed facade. My name is Martha, and for the better part of 30 years, this neighborhood has been my haven. I'm a retired librarian, a widow now that my dear Arthur has been gone these past 5 years, and I find my happiness in the quiet rhythms of life. As a woman in my early 60s, my days are usually filled with the comforting tasks of tending my flower beds, losing myself in books on my porch swing, and occasionally baking an excessive amount of chocolate chip cookies for when my grandchildren visit. My house isn't a mansion, but it's filled with love and memories, particularly the yard, which has always been my pride and joy. The crowning glory of that yard, and indeed a landmark on our street, is a magnificent oak tree. Arthur and I planted it as a sapling when we first moved in, a symbol of our new life together. Over the decades, it's grown into a majestic sentinel, its branches a bustling city for birds, its leaves a vibrant green shield in summer, transforming into a breathtaking carpet of gold and crimson each autumn. It provides wonderful shade, keeping the house cool, and its mere presence brings a profound sense of peace. This tree is more than just wood and leaves. It's woven into the fabric of our family's story, a living monument to the life we nurtured here. I've always been meticulous about raking, understanding that the beauty of autumn leaves also means a bit of work. I kept my lawn, the sidewalk, even the gutter clear. Most neighbors admired its grandeur, often pausing to remark on its seasonal beauty. For years, life here was characterized by mutual respect and quiet friendliness. We'd exchange waves, share gardening tips over the fence, the kind of simple, neighborly connections that make a place feel like home. That was my normal, my cherished stability. Conflict, especially the bitter kind with a neighbor, was something I went to great lengths to avoid. My philosophy was always live and let live. Or so I thought, until Karen arrived. About 6 months ago, the for sale sign on the Hendersons' lawn next door was replaced with a sold one. The Hendersons, a delightful elderly couple, had moved to be closer to their family. We'd shared a bittersweet farewell, and I'd harbored the usual hopes for new neighbors who would appreciate the quiet harmony of our street. That hope, as events would prove, was rather spectacularly misplaced. The new owner arrived not with a gentle ripple, but with a metaphorical crash. Her name was Carol Richards, but in my mind, she quickly became simply Karen. The day her oversized moving truck rumbled down our peaceful street, its speakers blasting some kind of jarring electronic music, I had an inkling that the neighborhood's equilibrium was about to be disturbed. Karen made an instant impression, though not entirely the kind one hopes for in a new neighbor. She looked to be in her mid-50s, her most striking feature a helmet of aggressively highlighted blonde hair that seemed to defy gravity. Her daily uniform consisted of loud, often animal print tops, paired with surprisingly pristine white athleisure pants, clothing that screamed, look at me, but also, don't you dare touch me. And then there were the enormous designer sunglasses, a permanent fixture on her face, whether she was squinting in the bright sun or retrieving mail from her shaded porch. They were less a fashion statement and more a barrier. My first direct interaction with her occurred a few days post-move. Following my long-standing tradition, I'd baked a small batch of my renowned lemon blueberry scones as a welcoming gesture. Plate in hand, covered with a checkered napkin, I walked over. I found her on her driveway, already engaged in what appeared to be a microscopic examination of its surface, armed with a state-of-the-art leaf blower that whined with an irritating intensity. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I offered, projecting my warmest smile over the drone of the machine. "I'm Martha, your neighbor from next door. I thought you might enjoy some freshly baked scones." She switched off the leaf blower with an abrupt click, the sudden silence almost deafening. She turned slowly, her sunglasses, like impenetrable black shields, seeming to scan me from my sensible gardening shoes to my graying hair. There was no answering smile. Her lips, painted a severe shade of fuchsia, remained resolutely pursed. "Thanks," she clipped out, her voice as flat and uninviting as a concrete slab. She accepted the plate without a flicker of warmth, then immediately jerked her chin towards my magnificent oak. "That your tree?" "It is indeed," I replied, a little disarmed by her directness. "A real beauty, isn't it? It's been a part of this street for over 30 years. I could already tell my usual neighborly charm was having zero effect. Her whole demeanor was sharp. "It drops leaves," she stated, the accusation clear in her tone. "Constantly. All over my brand new driveway. I just had this entire surface resealed, you know. It needs to be maintained in an immaculate condition." One perfectly manicured, coral pink fingernail tapped an impatient rhythm against the handle of the leaf blower. It was a nail clearly designed for pointing out flaws. A small knot of unease began to form in my stomach. "Well, yes, magnificent old trees like that do tend to shed their leaves, especially during the autumn months," I said, striving for a light, conciliatory tone. "I always make a point of raking my property thoroughly, and I keep the sidewalk clear for everyone, of course." "Oomph," was her sole, eloquent response before she pivoted back to her driveway, restarting the leaf blower with a vengeful roar. It was a dismissal as clear as a slammed door. The plate of scones sat on her porch railing, already looking forgotten. I mumbled a weak, "Well, I hope you enjoy them," and retreated to the sanctuary of my own yard, the whine of the leaf blower chasing me. The air between our properties suddenly felt a few degrees cooler. How, I wondered, could anyone look at that glorious tree and see only a nuisance? But I tried to brush it off. Moving is stressful, I reasoned. People aren't always at their best. Little did I suspect, this wasn't Karen stressed. This was simply Karen. And her fixation on a natural, seasonal cycle was about to escalate into a full-blown suburban Cold War. The leaf situation, as I began to call it with a sigh to my cat, Whiskers, didn't just fade away. It became Karen's apparent obsession. A few days after the non-scoon incident, I discovered a crisply folded note, printed on expensive, heavy-gauge cream paper, tucked with almost surgical precision under my doormat. "Dear occupant," it began, already setting a formal, impersonal tone. "It has been brought to my attention that the large deciduous tree situated on your property is causing a persistent and considerable leaf debris problem on my adjacent premises. This accumulation is aesthetically displeasing and necessitates continuous and undue maintenance on my part. I trust that you will take immediate and appropriate measures to rectify this ongoing nuisance. Sincerely, C. Richards." Rectify? What did she envision? Me, up in the branches with a giant vacuum cleaner? Or perhaps, training the squirrels to only deposit leaves on my side? I let out a long breath. This was already more neighborly friction than I'd experienced in 3 decades. My strategy, I decided, would be one of overwhelming, proactive neighborliness. The very next morning, I was out at the crack of dawn. I raked my entire lawn, the sidewalk, and, extending an olive branch, a significant portion of her driveway nearest to my tree. I bagged every last leaf meticulously, leaving the bags neatly at the curb for collection. I even offered a small, hopeful wave when I noticed her silhouette peering from behind her pristine blinds. No wave was returned. Instead, a few days later, a second note materialized. This one was shorter, sharper, the expensive stationery now feeling more like a weapon. Your recent raking attempts have proven insufficient. The leaves persist in their encroachment. This situation remains unacceptable. I strongly advise you to investigate professional trimming of the offending branches, or, more preferably, to consider the complete removal of the aforementioned tree. Removal? Arthur's tree? The tree that had shaded our children's summer picnics, the tree whose branches had held their first tire swing? My jaw, which had been attempting a diplomatic set, tightened into a line of pure resolve. This woman wasn't just particular, she was profoundly unreasonable. I decided a direct, albeit dreaded, conversation was necessary. I intercepted her one afternoon as she was wresting several large, glossy shopping bags from the trunk of her gleaming white SUV. "Karen," I began, my voice carefully modulated for calm and reason. "I've received your notes. I do understand that leaves can be a bit of a bother during the fall, but I must be very clear. Removing the tree is absolutely not an option. It's a perfectly healthy, mature oak, and it stands well within the boundaries of my property." She barely afforded me a glance, her enormous sunglasses reflecting a distorted, miniature version of my increasingly exasperated face. "It's a blight," she snapped, her voice as crisp and cold as a starched collar. "It's actively diminishing my property value with its incessant, messy shedding. If you are incapable or unwilling to act as a responsible homeowner, then perhaps the homeowners association will need to intervene and compel you to do so." The condescension in her tone was a physical thing, almost making me recoil. With that, she turned on her heel, the shopping bags crinkling self-importantly, and swept into her house. The click of her door shutting echoed down the quiet street with an air of ominous finality. The HOA. Of course. The suburban battlefield. I'd served on the board years ago. Its primary functions were managing the upkeep of common areas and ensuring residents didn't decide to paint their houses in neon stripes. I couldn't genuinely imagine them taking her side over a few leaves from a beloved, long-established tree. Still, the implied threat was an escalation, a deliberate attempt to intimidate. And true to her word, about a week later, an official-looking envelope from the HOA landed in my mailbox. Inside, a politely worded but formal letter informed me that a complaint had been lodged regarding excessive arboreal debris originating from my property and kindly requested that I address the concern with your neighbor to find an amicable solution. It was a standard, non-committal form letter designed to show they were responding to a complaint, but it still made my blood pressure spike. Karen was actually succeeding in making my peaceful life a bureaucratic nightmare. Her passive aggression then took on a more performative quality. I'd find small, meticulously swept piles of leaves deposited right up against my fence on her side, a silent, daily accusation. Then came the photography. I'd be out weeding my petunias, and from the corner of my eye, I'd catch the glint of her phone from her window, or even from her porch, as she overtly documented every leaf that dared to drift from my tree onto her precious concrete. It was unnerving, like being under constant, hostile surveillance. The stress began to wear me down. Sleep became elusive, my stomach perpetually tied in anxious knots. My cherished home, my sanctuary, was fast becoming a source of daily dread. I'd even catch myself glaring at my own beautiful oak, only to be flooded with immediate guilt. It wasn't the tree's fault its existence offended the queen of clean next door. I tentatively spoke to a few other neighbors. Most offered sympathetic clucks, but were clearly hesitant to get drawn into what was becoming the Great Leaf War. "Oh, that's just Karen for you," one neighbor, old Mr. Peterson, confided with a weary shrug. Last month, she tried to get the mailman disciplined because his truck idled for 30 seconds too long outside her house. Small comfort, indeed. I felt increasingly alone, the tension coiling tighter with each passing day, each falling leaf. She was systematically trying to grind me down, to bully me into surrendering a piece of my home soul. But felling my tree? That was a line she would never, ever push me across. I just hadn't realized how much uglier things would get before she was forced to understand that. The absolute, definitive breaking point, the instant where my weary patience shattered and reformed into a core of cold, hard anger, was that unforgettable morning. The morning of Karen's great trash offensive. The previous night had been blustery, and yes, a fresh, vibrant tapestry of golden and red leaves had danced across the neighborhood, inevitably gracing parts of Karen's driveway. I was already mentally preparing to undertake an extra, conciliatory sweep, even venturing slightly onto her territory near our property line, in a desperate, perhaps foolish, attempt to maintain a semblance of peace. But Karen, it appeared, had exhausted her reserves of, well, whatever minimal restraint she possessed. Or perhaps her particular strain of acute entitlement had simply metastasized. I was in my sunny kitchen, anticipating a quiet moment with a cup of Earl Grey and the morning crossword, when a flash of movement outside my window caught my attention. And there she was, in all her suburban warrior glory, the untamable blonde hair looking as though it had wrestled a cyclone and emerged victorious, the ever-present oversized sunglasses perched imperiously on her nose, and clad in a particularly lurid leopard print tracksuit that seemed to vibrate with aggressive energy. She was purposefully dragging her large, municipal trash can down her driveway. I watched, initially with mild puzzlement. Trash collection wasn't scheduled for another 2 days. Then, my puzzlement rapidly morphed into stunned disbelief, which then curdled into a slow, seething rage. She reached the precise edge of her meticulously manicured lawn, right where it kissed mine, and with a theatrical, almost gleeful grunt, she tipped the entire can over. A disgusting avalanche of refuse, soggy food scraps, greasy fast food wrappers, crumpled junk mail, coffee grounds clinging to banana peels, who knows what other horrors, cascaded directly onto my carefully tended grass, mingling obscenely with the very leaves she professed to despise. She then, with a flourish, kicked a stray orange peel further onto my property, a smirk of pure, unadulterated, malicious satisfaction plastered across her face. She actually grinned, that awful, triumphant grin, as the garbage flew. She even glanced directly at my front window, as if to confirm I was witnessing her vile masterpiece. I was so utterly flabbergasted, I just stood there, my teacup rattling a frantic Morse code against its saucer. It was so brazen, so appallingly juvenile, so profoundly disrespectful. That was the precipice. No more Mrs. Nice. Turn the other cheek, Martha. No more futile attempts to appease the unappeasable. This had transcended the absurdity of fallen leaves. This was about blatant, calculated disrespect, about aggressive bullying, and about a fundamental, stinking violation of my home, my haven, my peace. As I watched her saunter back towards her pristine house, leaving her reeking calling card on my lawn, a peculiar, icy calm settled over me. The anger was still there, a white-hot coal in my chest, but it was now focused, honed to a razor's edge. She wanted a war over foliage and perceived slights? She was about to find herself in a battle, but it wouldn't be fought on her terms, and it most certainly wouldn't just be about leaves anymore. My first act, once the initial shock subsided into grim determination, was to meticulously document her handiwork. I took photos from every conceivable angle. Wide shots showing the disgusting spread, close-ups of the rotting food, the general squalor she had so generously deposited. Then, armed with heavy-duty gloves and an even heavier heart, I cleaned it all up, each piece of her garbage fueling my resolve. As I worked, an idea began to germinate, a tiny seed of righteous indignation taking firm root. If she was going to behave like a character from a bad reality show, I needed to protect myself, and I needed undeniable, irrefutable proof of her campaign of harassment. That very afternoon, I made a significant investment, a set of high-quality, remarkably discreet security cameras. One was carefully positioned to provide a clear, unobstructed view of my front lawn and, crucially, the boundary line with her property. Another covered my driveway and the side of my house, offering a view of her comings and goings. I told myself it was a prudent measure for general home security, but in my heart I knew. We both knew who the primary subject of this new surveillance system was. Let her continue to document falling leaves with her phone camera. I would be documenting actual, tangible transgressions. For a few days following the great trash dumping, an unnerving quiet settled over our section of the street. Karen probably imagined her grand, garbage-laden gesture had shocked me into silent submission. I'd see her preening on her porch, occasionally casting smug, sideways glances towards my house. I responded with serene, enigmatic smiles whenever our eyes met, a tactic which, I noted with some satisfaction, seemed to irritate her far more than my previous, earnest attempts at peace. Then the cameras began to pay dividends, and in a manner far more significant than I had initially anticipated. Sure enough, within the first week, I captured crystal-clear footage of her, late one evening, clad in dark clothing, skulking across the property line like a B-movie villain, and furtively tossing a greasy fast food bag directly onto my prize-winning Peace roses. It was petty, it was childish, it was undeniably her, and now it was beautifully, irrevocably documented. But that, as it turned out, was merely the appetizer. The real bombshell came from reviewing the footage from the camera covering the side of her house and her driveway. I started noticing a peculiar, recurring pattern. Several times a week, always in the pre-dawn gloom, long before our street began to stir, a plain, unmarked white van would silently pull into her driveway. Karen, looking furtive and constantly glancing around, would emerge from her garage carrying several large, heavy-duty black plastic bags. Not her standard household trash bags. These were significantly larger, contractor grade, and swiftly load them into the waiting van. This clandestine operation occurred 2, sometimes even 3, times a week, always under the cover of near darkness. My curiosity, now thoroughly piqued, led me to closer observation. Her regular, city-issued municipal trash bins for household waste were often only half full, sometimes even less, on actual collection days. So, what on earth was in these mysterious, voluminous black bags? And why the cloak and dagger, pre-dawn pickups? A suspicion, ugly and insistent, began to form. Our neighborhood was strictly zoned as residential. Commercial businesses, particularly those generating substantial waste or traffic, were explicitly prohibited from operating out of homes. Furthermore, commercial waste disposal was subject to its own stringent set of rules, regulations, and, importantly, fees. I decided to meticulously review and zoom in on the footage. One chilly morning, as she was heaving one of the overstuffed bags into the van, it snagged on the van's door latch and ripped slightly. Spilling out onto her pristine driveway, in plain view of my camera, was a cascade of fabric scraps. Myriad pieces, in a dazzling array of bright, synthetic colors, many adorned with glitter, sequins, and feathers, the unmistakable detritus of costume-making or some similar craft-based enterprise. This, combined with the constant stream of deliveries I'd noticed, large, unmarked boxes from wholesale fabric suppliers and craft distributors, painted a rather vivid picture. My perpetually aggrieved neighbor, the one obsessed with superficial perfection and the imagined transgressions of my innocent tree, was very likely running an undeclared, home-based business and was surreptitiously disposing of her commercial waste to avoid detection and associated costs. The sheer volume of material strongly suggested this was far more than a casual hobby. The hypocrisy was simply breathtaking. Here she was, waging a relentless, bitter war against my historic oak tree for the natural crime of shedding a few leaves, all while she herself was potentially violating multiple HOA covenants and quite possibly local ordinances with an illicit business and a system of illegal waste disposal. The irony was so rich, it was almost decadent. My tree shed leaves, a natural and beautiful process. She was shedding evidence of an illicit, undeclared commercial operation. The impending satisfaction was already beginning to taste wonderfully sweet. Karen, in her blind entitlement, had inadvertently handed me all the ammunition I could possibly need to end her reign of terror. Armed with my meticulously compiled evidence, the damning footage of her dumping household trash on my lawn, the surreptitious late-night fast food bag toss into my roses, and most critically, the multiple recordings of the early morning rendezvous with the unmarked van, complete with close-ups of the telltale fabric scraps, I knew my next move had to be decisive. Another conversation with Karen was out of the question. She was clearly beyond the reach of reason or neighborly appeal. It was time to go official, but this time, I would be doing it on my terms, backed by a mountain of irrefutable proof. First, I organized everything with the precision of a seasoned librarian. I created a master file. Dated and time-stamped video clips were burned onto a USB drive, supplemented by clear, high-resolution printed screenshots from the most incriminating moments. I then composed a formal, carefully worded letter to the HOA board. In it, I calmly and factually detailed Karen's escalating campaign of harassment, the repeated instances of littering, and my new, far more serious findings regarding the suspected undeclared business and the highly improper disposal of its commercial waste. I meticulously cited the specific HOA bylaws I believed she was flagrantly violating, rules pertaining to the maintenance of property, nuisance behavior, and, most significantly, the explicit prohibition on operating businesses from residential properties that generated excessive traffic, noise, or, as in this case, substantial undisclosed waste. Ironically, just as I was sealing the envelope containing my comprehensive complaint package for the HOA, another email from them landed in my inbox. It seemed Karen, emboldened by my perceived inaction after her trash-dumping spectacle, had decided to double down on her own offensive. She was now formally demanding an emergency HMA meeting to discuss the ongoing and severe hazard and significant property damage allegedly caused by my neglected, dangerous, and oversized tree. She was insisting, with her usual theatricality, that the HOA compel me to either drastically mutilate it with severe pruning or remove it entirely. The sheer audacity, the breathtaking hypocrisy, almost made me laugh out loud. She had, with a magnificent lack of self-awareness, just handed me the perfect, public stage for my own carefully prepared revelations. The emergency meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening, to be held in the somewhat sterile environment of the community clubhouse. I made a point of arriving a little early, wanting to gauge the atmosphere. Several other neighbors were already there, looking vaguely uncomfortable and resentful, most likely having been strong-armed into attending by Karen's dramatic summons. Karen herself was positioned near the front, holding court like a queen addressing her reluctant subjects. She was dressed in a severe, almost funereal black pantsuit, her blonde hair lacquered into an unyielding, helmet-like structure. Her ubiquitous, oversized sunglasses were, for once, absent, revealing small, restless eyes that darted around the room with an expression of smug, predatory anticipation. A thick stack of papers rested in her lap, her evidence, no doubt, against my poor, innocent oak tree. The HOA president, a generally mild-mannered and beleaguered-looking man named Mr. Henderson, no relation, thankfully, to the lovely previous owners of Karen's house, eventually called the meeting to order. Karen, without waiting to be recognized, immediately launched into her pre-rehearsed tirade. "As you are all undoubtedly aware," she began, her voice dripping with a syrupy, false concern that didn't quite mask the steel beneath, "I have been attempting, for many months now, to persuade my neighbor," she gestured dismissively in my direction without making eye contact, "to address the very serious and escalating issue of her enormous, overgrown, and frankly hazardous tree. It relentlessly drops copious amounts of debris, which is staining my newly resurfaced driveway, consistently clogging my gutters, and, quite frankly, it stands as an unsightly blight that significantly degrades the property values of this entire esteemed community." She dramatically flourished her photographs, close-ups of individual leaves resting on her concrete. A few neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. Others suddenly found the pattern of the carpet tiles intensely fascinating. She pressed on, her voice rising in pitch. "I have repeatedly and patiently asked her to assume her responsibilities as a homeowner, but she flagrantly refuses. This tree, ladies and gentlemen, is in clear and undeniable violation of our community standards for property upkeep and aesthetic harmony." When she finally paused, drawing a deep, theatrical breath, Mr. Henderson turned his weary gaze to me. "Martha, do you have a response to these concerns?" I stood up slowly, clutching my own folder, my heart beating a steady, determined rhythm. "Yes, Mr. Henderson, I do. And I must actually thank Karen for calling this meeting, as it provides an invaluable opportunity for all of us to discuss the vital importance of community standards, responsible homeownership, and adherence to our agreed-upon bylaws." I paused deliberately, allowing my gaze to sweep across the room, making brief eye contact with several of my neighbors, before finally letting it rest squarely on Karen. Her smug expression faltered, just for a fraction of a second, a tiny crack appearing in her composed facade. "While it is undeniably true that my magnificent oak tree sheds its leaves, a perfectly natural and, I believe, beautiful process for a healthy tree that has graced this neighborhood with its presence for over 3 decades, I have always been exceptionally diligent in managing them. However," I continued, my voice remaining steady and clear, projecting to the back of the room, "the issue I wish to bring to the board's, and indeed the community's, attention tonight is of a considerably more serious and potentially actionable nature, pertaining directly to Karen's own adherence to our community rules and, quite possibly, local municipal ordinances." A distinct murmur rippled through the assembled residents. Karen's face, moments before alight with righteous indignation, began to tighten, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows arching towards her inflexible hairline. "What on earth are you insinuating?" she snapped, her voice sharp with sudden alarm. "This meeting is about your tree, your negligence." "Actually, Karen," I replied, my tone even and unwavering, "it's about this." I stepped forward and presented Mr. Henderson with a USB drive and my neatly organized folder of printed evidence. This folder contains video footage from my recently installed security cameras. Firstly, it clearly shows Karen here, on multiple occasions, deliberately and maliciously throwing trash directly onto my property, culminating in the particularly unpleasant incident where she emptied the entire contents of her kitchen garbage can onto my front lawn. Audible gasps and shocked whispers filled the room. Karen's face cycled through shades of pale, then a blotchy, furious red. "That's an outrageous lie. That footage it's doctored." "It's fake," she spluttered, her voice cracking. "The date and timestamps on the recordings are quite clear and verifiable, Karen," I stated calmly. "But as concerning as that behavior is, it is unfortunately not all. The cameras, in their diligent watch, also captured something of far greater concern to this community. Several times a week, Invariably, in the very early hours of the morning, an unmarked white van is recorded visiting Karen's property. She is then seen loading this van with multiple, large, black bags filled with what is unmistakably commercial waste, specifically vast quantities of fabric offcuts, glitter, and other materials entirely consistent with a garment or costume-making business. Our HOA covenants, as you all know, are quite explicit regarding the operation of businesses that generate such levels of waste from residential properties. Furthermore, the improper and clandestine disposal of commercial waste is also a significant violation of city ordinances, carrying substantial penalties. I then held up the enlarged, printed photos of the telltale fabric scraps spilling from the torn bag, and gestured towards the screen where Mr. Henderson was beginning to play a clip of the pre-dawn van rendezvous. The room was eerily silent, the only sound Karen's increasingly panicked, shallow breathing. It's just a hobby," she stammered, her voice suddenly shrill and unsteady, her eyes darting around wildly for an ally, finding none. "Old clothes. I'm donating them." "Yes, donations for the needy." Several £100s of donations a month, Karen, disposed of in such a surreptitious manner designed to avoid commercial waste collection fees. I countered gently, letting the facts speak for themselves. Loaded into an unmarked van before sunrise? Most legitimate charities I'm familiar with are quite happy to accept donations during daylight hours, or even arrange for pickups using clearly marked vehicles. One of the senior board members, Mrs. Davis, a formidable woman known for her sharp intellect and no-nonsense demeanor, fixed Karen with a steely gaze. "Is this true, Mrs. Richards? Are you, in fact, operating an undeclared commercial enterprise from your residence and improperly disposing of its waste in this manner?" Karen's carefully constructed composure utterly disintegrated. The leopard print fury she displayed on my lawn was a mere flicker compared to the inferno of her current meltdown. "This is an absolute outrage. A vile invasion of my privacy. How dare you spy on me, you horrible old woman," she shrieked, jabbing a trembling, coral-nailed finger in my direction. "She's the problem here, with her filthy, disgusting, leaf-dropping tree." But her accusations fell flat. No one was looking at me with condemnation anymore. All eyes, filled with a mixture of shock and disapproval, were laser-focused on Karen. Mr. Henderson, his face now a mask of grave concern, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Richards," he said, his voice firm, "these are exceptionally serious allegations, and they appear to be substantiated by rather compelling evidence. The board will have no choice but to launch an immediate and thorough investigation into these matters. If these claims are proven true, you will be facing significant fines for multiple HOA violations, and please be aware, we will also be legally obligated to report the commercial waste disposal issue to the relevant city authorities." Karen's face crumpled as if she'd been physically struck. The fight, the bluster, the sheer unadulterated Karen-ness seemed to drain out of her like air from a punctured, gaudy balloon. She snatched her expensive handbag, her movements jerky and uncoordinated, and practically fled from the clubhouse, nearly tripping over a discarded agenda in her haste. As the door slammed shut behind her, we could hear her muffled shouts echoing down the hallway, something about incompetent HOAs, vindictive, nosy neighbors, and everyone being out to get her. A stunned, almost disbelieving silence descended upon the room she had vacated. The emergency meeting about my supposedly problematic tree had, quite spectacularly and satisfyingly, morphed into an impromptu hearing about Karen's far more significant and, frankly, illegal transgressions. The profound satisfaction wasn't just in the public reveal of her deceit. It was in the quiet, affirming nods of understanding from my neighbors, the almost palpable restoration of sanity and fairness, and the certain knowledge that Karen's reign of petty, suburban terror was definitively and deservedly over. The aftermath of that now legendary HOA meeting was swift and, for Karen, decidedly unpleasant. The HOA board, galvanized by the clarity of my evidence, conducted their investigation with uncharacteristic alacrity. It didn't take them long to corroborate everything. They unearthed online records of her substantial bulk fabric purchases, and a neighbor from 2 streets over even came forward, sheepishly admitting to having noticed the peculiar unmarked van on numerous early mornings, but hadn't connected the dots until my revelations. Karen was subsequently slammed with a series of hefty fines from the HOA, covering her nuisance behavior, the trash dumping being Exhibit A, the improper disposal of waste on common and private property, and, of course, for operating an unauthorized and undeclared business from her home in direct violation of community covenants. The HOA also, true to Mr. Henderson's word, reported the commercial waste issue to the city. That triggered another official investigation, which, I later heard through the neighborhood grapevine, resulted in even more substantial fines from the municipal authorities, along with a strict cease and desist order for her home-based costume empire until she complied with all pertinent commercial regulations. This, naturally, would include paying for legitimate and significantly more expensive commercial waste removal. Suddenly, her meticulously manicured lawn and obsessively pristine driveway seemed to plummet down her list of priorities. She became a veritable ghost in our neighborhood. The flamboyant leopard print ensembles were rarely sighted. The aggressive, performative sweeping of her driveway ceased entirely. Mostly, she was just a fleeting shadow, scurrying from her front door to her oversized SUV and back, those enormous sunglasses now serving less as a fashion statement and more as a shield to hide her eyes from a world that had, quite suddenly, stopped revolving around her every whim and demand. It came as no surprise to anyone when, less than 2 months after the HOA meeting, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. Apparently, residing in a community where the rules and standards of decent behavior actually applied to her was simply an untenable proposition. My beautiful, resilient oak tree still stands tall and proud, its leaves rustling a symphony of peace in the gentle breeze, a silent, steadfast witness to the entire ridiculous and ultimately satisfying drama. It continues to shed its leaves each autumn, a natural, glorious cycle that no longer causes me a single moment's anxiety. The new family who bought Karen's house are delightful, a young couple with 2 small children. The first thing the wife said to me, leaning over the fence with a genuine smile, was how much they admired my magnificent tree and how they looked forward to its shade in the summer. She even asked if I'd share my recipe for lemon blueberry scones. Looking back, the entire saga with Karen was undeniably stressful, an unwelcome disruption to my quiet life. But it also imparted a valuable, if hard-won lesson. Sometimes, continuously turning the other cheek simply provides a clearer target for further aggression. There are moments when you must stand your ground, not with reciprocal malice, but with unwavering facts, quiet dignity, and firm resolve. Karen, in her cocoon of entitlement and her irrational rage over a few perfectly natural leaves, relentlessly tried to make my life miserable. But in doing so, with every escalating act of petty tyranny, she inadvertently laid bare her own deceptions and orchestrated her own rather spectacular downfall. There's a profound, almost poetic justice in that, a satisfaction that runs deeper than merely winning a neighborhood squabble. It's the quiet, contented hum of a restored balance, the gentle rustle of leaves in a once again friendly neighborhood, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the biggest, ugliest messes are indeed the ones people so diligently and foolishly make for themselves. And my lawn? It's never looked more peaceful.